Hi friends, welcome to another special episode of 1840. We're going to be examining different aspects of what's happening now in Israel. We're obviously not a news organization, we're not breaking any news, but we're going to try to live up to our responsibility that I think we have to our community of providing a lens, kind of process a lot of what's taking place. I'm sure nearly all of our listeners, if not all of our listeners, have many news outlets where they can stay up to date. And what we're trying to do here is provide, I wouldn't call it a breather, but a lens, a window to process everything that people are taking in right now, speaking to experts in the field, having conversation, coming together as a community. We have a few very special episodes coming out, really looking at different angles of what's taking place. And I think today's episode is incredibly important, really focusing on the mental health aspect of what's happening in Israel. I remember I went to the rally in New York that was organized by the UJA alongside many other organizations. I was extraordinarily moved when New York City Mayor Eric Adams got up and he said something really extraordinary.
I am not going to be long. I'm going to give you 4 words. This morning on my briefing, my special counsel, Lisa Zomberg, said something that I want us all to acknowledge. We've been through some tough time, New Yorkers. We are tough people. We saw the center of our trade collapse. We saw some of the horrific actions that played out on the stage of our city and our country. But she said something that hits me to my soul. She stated to our team, we are not all right. We are not all right when we see young girls pulled from their home and dragged through the streets. We are not all right when we see grandmothers being pulled away from their homes and children shot in front of their families. We are not all right when right here in the city of New York you have those who celebrate at the same time when the devastation is taking place in our city. We are not all right when Hamas believes that they are fighting on behalf of something in their destructive, despicable action that carried out. We are not all right when we still have hostages who have not come home to their family. We are not all right. And we're not going to say we have a stiff upper lip and act like everything is fine. Everything is not fine. Israel has a right to defend himself, and that's the right that we know. Your fight is our fight. Your fight is our fight. Right here in New York, we have the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. This is the place that our voices must raise and cascade throughout the entire country. We will not be all right until every person responsible for this act is held accountable. We don't have to pretend.
I was so moved by the way he focused on it. Different people are focusing on different things, but he kind of gave language to what I know that I have felt, and I know that so many other people have felt, of we are not all right. You know, there is a lot of inspiration, there's a lot of unity that's incredibly moving, but there is a part, maybe it's in quiet, this angst, this sense of vulnerability, of exposure, of deep, deep existential uncertainty that we, I think, all have gone through to different degrees depending where you are, but the Jewish people throughout the world really were confronted with an existential uncertainty that most people have not felt vis-a-vis the land of Israel in our lifetimes, and that feeling of we are not all right. It was just such visceral, such honest language. It reminded me of the character, those who know, Marcel Wallace, who says, you know, taking out some of the expletives, I'm pretty far from okay. I'm pretty far from okay. One of the difficulties during these periods is small talk. Small talk suffers, which I guess for people who don't love small talk, I don't love small talk, but small talk becomes a lot harder when issues of urgency and pressing matters that are so big, then those little exchanges of small talk that used to be so easy and so natural. How's it going? Oh, everything's great. Let's catch up later. Small talk begins to evaporate. And I actually think that's something very dangerous because the integrity of our lived lives can evaporate in an instant. We feel that, I don't know, doesn't really matter how I'm doing. It doesn't really matter how my day is going. I can't really complain about anything given that we're at war. And that can easily descend, and you kind of have to be careful it doesn't descend into like a nihilism or a lack of care that people express for themselves, for others. Not God forbid, no one's descending into being malicious. It's the exact opposite. There is a unity, there is a purpose. But what sometimes can get lost is like the small talk, those little crevices of conversation, of life, of just shooting the breeze, making jokes, where all of that thing gets compressed by the weight and the urgency of the moment that we're in, where all we're left to say is, are you okay? Is no, we're not all right. And we're pretty far from okay right now. And that's why I thought it was really important to talk a little bit about some of the mental health implications of what's happening right now. And that is why it is such a privilege to introduce our first guest today. This is someone who I assume most people have never heard of, though he really has a world-renowned reputation. His name is Dr. Danny Brom. He's a clinical psychologist and founder of Metiv, which is Herzog's Israel Center for the Treatment of Psychotrauma. He has worked directly with the IDF treating post-traumatic stress disorder, published numerous articles on post-traumatic stress disorder, has been flown out to other countries, to the Ukraine, other war-torn areas to train leaders in the field. He is really an internationally renowned expert on PTSD, on trauma, on communal resilience. And I reached out to him and I was so moved. It was already the nighttime in Israel and I texted him. We had made up to speak. It was late because he was in a hotel dealing with people who have been displaced from their homes in Israel, which you'll hear about in a moment. And at the end of a very long day, and I'm always so hesitant to reach out to people, the most important thing for people with his expertise is not to come on to a podcast or be interviewed. It's to help the people in front of him. And he finally got back at the end of a long day, and he responded, I am sorry. I am wiped from a whole day in a hotel with 1,500 displaced people. Give me another 15 minutes. That's an incredible person, somebody who has really stared the trauma and the difficulty of the moment that we are in directly in the face, somebody who has worked with soldiers in the IDF and really around the world, communities around the world, helping people in the way that they process trauma, which is why it is truly a privilege to speak to a leader in the field. Here is our conversation with Dr. Danny Brom. I was wondering if you could begin by explaining a little bit what exactly is the nature of trauma that emerges from war. You know, you have worked with the IDF, you've worked with former soldiers. What is unique about the trauma that emerges specifically from war?
So let me start by saying that, of course, Israel hasn't only had one war. There is a multi-layered traumatic background in most of the Israeli population. If it's from the European background, where the Holocaust is part of our legacy and our history, and then there is the creation of the State of Israel, which went with a war. And then there is the other wars, which is in 1956, 1967, 1973, 1982, 2006. And then besides the official wars, there were lots of incursions and lots of military activities. So basically, we're not talking about one war. I'll give you an example. I came on Aliyah in 1988 from the Netherlands. And then in 1990 and 91, there was the enormous influx of the Russian Jews. And I remember well that one of the nights there were a lot of flights coming in, thousands and thousands of people. And I was working in a psychiatric outpatient clinic. I met the chief psychiatrist there who said to me, you know, now we'll never have to leave this country. That was his reaction on the influx. So the existential anxiety that Israelis live. Another example I can give you, that when one of my sons was 15 years old and was very interested in everything that happened, at some point he said to his parents, us, he said, I think that the experiment that is called Israel will not exist in about 50 years. That as a context of what happened now in the past 10 days makes it maybe a bit understandable that we are not talking about a war or a terrorist attack. We're talking about a long history of persecution, of existential fear, and then on top of that, building a new society. It's only 75 years old with very little history or tradition in the political system. It's a very complex situation.
That's heartbreaking to hear somebody say, now we're not going to have to run again to another country. That baked into their arrival is, can we finally feel a sense of security? And this is the first time, I'm younger, there feels like there's a threat to the continued existence of a Jewish homeland. What exactly is trauma, the trauma that you treat specifically among soldiers? How is that different than anxiety? How is that different than being nervous or being stressed out? What is the unique characteristic of trauma itself that you've seen and studied that emerges from war?
If we're talking about soldiers, we are talking about how our system, basically our bodily nervous system, has the ability to go into survival mode. When you get into combat, then something else takes over. Your brain basically functions in a very different way. And many of the people we see say that. I saw a soldier who has now been fighting in the past week, and he said, I was walking through the field where all these people were murdered and the cars were on fire, and it was a very, very hellish, something from you see in films, a battlefield. And then at some point, he had this very strong feeling of anxiety, and that lasted, and he was in a freeze. He couldn't move for a minute or so, and then he got back to himself. And from that moment on, he could function very well. He stayed a bit afraid that that might happen again, but basically it didn't. He functioned, and then after a week, he got 2 days off. And he was looking to speak with someone who might understand what he's going through. And so we talked, and it is very clear that what happened at that moment is his nervous system got overwhelmed. And the nervous system then knows how to take care of it. You get into survival mode, which is hardware, which is not software. The existential fear puts someone into a different mode of functioning. You do exactly what is necessary, and you function, and feelings are put aside. They're not relevant for survival. So the challenge after any trauma is to get out of survival mode and integrate your experience into your life history.
That's so profound, to integrate your experiences into your life history, because it sounds in many ways, the Jewish people are not foreign to trauma, as you know, and figuring out ways to integrate our collective trauma into our individual stories. How do you treat someone who has acute trauma? What do? You just talk about what happened? What are the treatments that allow someone to process trauma?
So I think we know more and more about what it takes. And of course, there are many methods, and actually, there's not one method that has been proven to be better than any other. Some methods are a bit more humane than others. Some methods might be a bit more natural and easier for people to go with. What we know now is what you need is, first of all, you need to regulate your emotions and your arousal. Because when you think about the most horrific things that happen to you, your body starts to play up, and you might feel your heart rate go up. You might feel some difficulty to breathe. You might feel some stomach aches or headaches or all these kinds of symptoms. And so the first thing in therapy is basically to help people regulate themselves. If they get over-aroused, processing is not possible. There is a sort of a window of tolerance, as we call it, window of tolerance of the arousal in your body. When it gets too high or too low, then you can't really process.
So how do you teach someone to regulate? What are the practical ways to teach somebody to regulate their emotions?
One thing is techniques, and I will say something about that. But nowadays there is way too much emphasis on techniques. What regulates people is another person. When you are together with someone you really trust, that helps. When you get a safe hug from someone who is really interested and curious to hear you, that is something that regulates.
I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to let you know that I'm welling up a little bit emotionally, even hearing that the most effective way where you began, and to hear that the greatest technique for a person is another person who you trust. A hug, that sparked something in me. It's hard not to feel that now. That's extraordinarily moving.
Yeah, so at this moment here in Israel, there's almost a frenzy. A lot of my colleagues who say, we need to do interventions, we need to teach techniques, we need to do, which is very understandable because also as therapists, we don't want to feel helpless. And to be honest, we are helpless in the face of these horrific things. So then there is almost too much doing and too little just being with each other and giving someone the feeling that, whatever you went through, I hate it, but I'm able to hear it and I'm with you. That is the basis of all therapy. So, this frenzy of techniques and of treatment, we are not past the trauma. We're still in the middle. And then thinking that you can treat is not realistic. The first condition for effective trauma treatment is that the trauma is over. And the trauma is not over. We still have unidentified people. We still have more than 200 people that were kidnapped and are in Gaza. And seeing how they have slaughtered people a week and a half ago, of course, everyone is very, very afraid of what will happen to these people. And then there are the big words of the leadership. We will win and we'll be strong. And to be honest, the leadership in Israel more or less crashed. And that is one of the most difficult things for people to experience because they need leadership. They need leaders that in a reliable way can tell us what happened, take responsibility, be with whatever happened, and then take us further. And not only these words of we will show them and Hamas will never exist again. And, of course, that plays into the very strong feelings of revenge and insult and of how horrified we are. But what we will need is a leadership that can lead us to create a feeling of trust in our leadership. I just came back from visiting one of the hotels near the Dead Sea, where in one hotel, 1,500 people from the city of Sderot are being housed at this moment. And you would think that Israel would know how to do this, not only how to house it, but give people some security of how long are you there? And are you going to get all meals? Do you have to pay for it? What is happening? And it's so unclear.
Can I ask you something? You were in a hotel, you have 1,500 people from Sderot who are displaced right now. They were affected quite heinously from the massacre over Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah.
Yeah.
If you're meeting with an individual, so what are you doing in that moment? What are you saying? Is that where you go to techniques? What does that meeting look like when you meet with a family who are in that place of vulnerability?
We actually went there now to see if there is a basis for interventions and for being with these people. And I'm not sure there is, because people are being told, maybe on Sunday you'll have to move back to Sderot. And people are scared. And if there's no clarity of, what is going to happen, there's little we can do to give people, a way to process. But what we will do actually is first do a needs assessment. That is what we need to do. 1,500 people. What we are planning is a needs assessment, not by who comes to you, but reaching out to every person, every adult, every parent, and every child to see how are you doing. And it's simple questions that we need to know before we can understand what we need to do.
You know, this is a generation, like you said, like so many generations in Israel, where young children are being exposed to the hostility and the vulnerability, and even some of the images that have been shared, particularly on social media, that previous generations were not exposed this closely to the horrors of terrorism, to the horrors and tragedies that have been perpetuated in Israel. And I'm curious, when it comes to children, is treating trauma different among children? Does it have a stronger effect, or are children more resilient? How does the issue of trauma play out either differently or similarly when it relates specifically to young children who are being exposed to things that are so horrific?
Yeah, trauma in general basically attacks the system in our bodies that helps us regulate ourselves. Now, for adults, that can be temporary, and then you get back to yourself. In soldiers, that is not a one-time thing. That is 3 years of being in a combat unit. So it really becomes part of who you are. And you're in survival mode all the time for 3 years. And actually, no one tells you how to get out of it. You're being wired for war. Your brain is wired for war, and no one unwires you. That is part of what we are doing in our soldiers program for people also not with PTSD, but just to help people get out of survival mode. Now about children. Children are, of course, even more sensitive to that attack on their regulation. We know that, and what you see is children get dysregulated. We know that a lot of children in Israel are being diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, and actually they're dysregulated because of the enormous tensions that we live with. So there's a lot of misdiagnosis there. Now, the good thing about children is that in a way, it's easier to work with them. They're more flexible and more open to change. And we actually have developed for many years now a program to teach children emotion regulation. And that is a program that, we were supposed to start this month or next month in Ukraine. Well, that is now not exactly what we will be able to do, but we will have to strengthen the application of that program here in Israel. Yeah, it's enormous task to basically protect the development of our children from the influences of all these things.
I was wondering if you could speak for a moment. I'm in the States right now, but I feel very uneasy, as does all American Jewry and all the friends of Israel throughout the world. But there also is a great sense of unity, and there's this feeling of we want to preserve this unity that we have right now. And I'm curious, from your research, what is the healthiest communal messaging that we should be having now as it relates to communal resilience? We see there's been mobilized efforts throughout the world. People are being more unified and friendlier and nicer and more uplifted. You see this change and people want to hang on to it. I don't know how realistic that is necessarily, but it's definitely a moving sentiment. And I'm curious if you could just share a little bit, almost generally, about communal resilience. How do you ensure that Jewish people throughout the world are able to have the resilience and the strength and capacity to respond, and for the long term, to these times of difficulty?
I'm going back again. I hope you don't find me a one-track mind, but survival mode also has an effect on how close people get with each other. When you are in survival mode, you attach, when you see brothers in arms, in these units in the army, when they've been in combat, they get bonded so strongly, and that is helpful. That is what helps people be less anxious. And now in Israel for the past few years has been terribly divided, and people have been warning that this is really dangerous for the state of Israel to be so divided. Now this happened, and everyone is helping each other. The level of volunteering at this moment is way out of context. Well, I mean, it's understandable when there is a war, but I think also the Jewish people outside of Israel feel involved. Let me just say a few words more about what we do with combat soldiers after they're out of the army. It's a process called peace of mind, where we take soldiers, whole units, for a period of processing their experience. And in the middle of that process, we take them for a week to a Jewish community somewhere in the world. A lot in New York, in Miami, in Boston, in Los Angeles, in London, in Toronto. And these soldiers then 2 by 2 live in the homes of people, and they do the hard work in that week of about 40 to 50 hours of sitting in a group with their friends that they've fought with for 3 years, and then process their experiences and get out of survival mode, understanding how deeply they still are in survival mode. And what I've seen is that this also gives an enormous important role for Jewish people outside of Israel to really understand what needs to happen for these, I'm saying, kids, for our kids that give 3 years of their lives, but actually it is not 3 years. It is very often a year after, where they just need to get away, where they just need to unload. And many stay in partial survival mode for many years until they go into one of those programs of peace of mind and say, finally, wow, I now know what I want to do in life. I now know that I don't just want to survive. I want to live. I want to be creative. So there is a role, and it's not a traditional role of giving money. It is a role of being involved, having people in your home, seeing how they change in a week, what kind of work can be done. It's a tremendous privilege, both for us as organizers and therapists who come with the group, and for the guys, or not only guys, there's also women, and for the Jewish community who basically give a communal hug to the group of people. So it is something we can do together. And what we already know now is there will be such an enormous need after what we're going through now. And it seems that we're really not over it. It will become worse if we really go into Gaza, and who knows what will happen in the north. It's tragic.
It's scary times. Our listeners are all voracious readers. If you could share a little bit, what are the book recommendations? Are there any specific English books that you recommend to soldiers to help them better understand how to process their trauma?
That book still has to be written. The need is for warm human interaction and giving an example of you're able to lean back. You're able to look someone in the eyes. You're able to cry. You're able to be anxious. You're able to love. You're able to be intimate if you dare to break that anxiety. Israeli men have great difficulties to be intimate, and we hear that from their wives, because the softer way of interaction can be frightening, and people carry a lot when you have seen death so close, and we have lost your friends, and now it's all, not only soldiers, but all those people who have lost these kids who were in a party. How can you ever do a party again?
I didn't ask any biographical details because I was so much more interested in your actual kind of scholarship and work, but I'm wondering, could you share with me what brought you specifically to this work of post-traumatic work, specifically with soldiers?
I'll give you a very short version, and that is that my father was a musician living in Switzerland. During the war, my mother, who was born in England, happened to be in Switzerland and couldn't go back, and they found each other. And then immediately after the war, there were organizations looking for young people to work with children who came out of the camps or out of hiding during the Holocaust. And my parents then moved to Belgium to lead a orphanage, and they worked with children, and my brother and sister were born there. And then later, my father was asked to lead an orphanage in the Netherlands. And so it is as if the children went into the business of my father. My brother and sister both are social workers and worked with Holocaust survivors. And I became a psychologist and work in the field of trauma. So, yeah, that is cross-generational interests
And those generations that have animated your work should continue to provide the communal hug and allow us to hear the music, your father's original profession. It seems like to be able to go back and hear that music and have that sense of trust and intimacy with our own lives and those closest with us. I can't thank you from the bottom of my heart taking a time out, helping so many of our brothers and sisters in Israel. We are sending our love, our tefillos, our prayers to you and Amcha Yisrael. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Dr. Brom.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things that I found so comforting and moving about the conversation with Dr. Brom was almost the tone of his voice, the way that he spoke. He had obviously a harrowing day with who he was dealing with, where he was dealing with them. And, there were definitely frustrations that he shared, but the calmness with which he shares and the way he's able to keep a stasis even in the face of such difficulty is really something remarkable. It just pulls me back to his original response to me. Give me another 15 minutes. Let me collect myself. And this was somebody who was deeply collected and somebody who really, that intergenerational stability that I think is the greatest anchor of the Jewish people. The fact that we are connected to generations past. This is not our first time confronting horror. This is not our first time rising from difficulty, confronting pain. We are a nation who knows and has lived the verse, Hazorim Bedima Barina Yiksaru. We have planted with tears, and we have, generation after generation, reaped with joy. And somebody who has seen people plant with those tears and has helped transform them into experiences of joy and allow people to find that stasis in their lives, to leave that world of survival and enter a world of thriving and living and being a part of society. I found it very, very moving to speak with him. And I think most of all, what I found so deeply moving was his own story, which I almost asked him in passing at the end, but that his story of trauma really begins with his own father, who began his career as a musician, of taking all of the different notes of life and being able to transform them into music, is something that I think we are seeing before our eyes. And I think that's a beautiful way to introduce our next guests. Mike Meyerheim is the COO of KeepOlim, which helps people who have just recently made Aliyah, and Susan Cohen directs the mental health program of their work, people who have recently made Aliyah, and they work a great deal with lone soldiers in the state of Israel. And I thought now was an important time to talk to people who are really doing the work in helping ensure that the spirits of the Jewish people and people who have made that incredible decision, that heroic decision to build lives in the land of Israel, to build Jewish lives in the land of Israel, and provide them the framework and the services to do that. It is our absolute pleasure to introduce our conversation with Susan Cohen and Mike Meyerheim. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do in general.
KeepOlim has been in existence for about 8 or 9 years now. The goal behind the organization is to help Olim from all over the world with any issues that they have. One of the segments of our organization, there are a couple of segments. I oversee the part that deals with soldiers, lone soldiers, families of soldiers, people who have made Aliyah and have been only a few years in Israel and have children that are preparing to draft into the army, but they haven't yet quite adjusted to language, society. And I help them before, during, and after their service in the Army to go through the process correctly, pick preferred units for the character of the person, make sure they stay alive the whole way through.
That is definitely holy work. Maybe you could just tell our listeners very briefly. People use the term a lot, and I am suspicious that not everybody knows what the term means. What is a lone soldier? I remember the first time I heard the term, I just thought it was a soldier who, is lonely or sad. What is a lone soldier?
You're asking a great question. Currently today, there are approximately 7,200 lone soldiers in Israel. Okay? Lone soldiers are broken into a couple of categories. There are lone soldiers, which are people that come from around the world to serve in the Israeli army. Okay, the largest number comes from North America, meaning United States and Canada. The second largest community that comes to Israel, makes Aliyah, and goes to the army are the Russian-speaking. Okay, they could be the Ukraine, it could be Russia proper, and then from there broken down into smaller groups like South America, Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, and those that come from outside the country do not have parents in Israel. So they're identified as lone soldiers because they do not have any parental guidance in the country. Okay, so that comes out to 58% of the lone soldiers are from outside of Israel. 48% are Israeli lone children, the lone soldiers, where parents can't afford to financially help them anymore, or the phenomenon now is that they come from religious families who do not want their children to go to the army, and they've decided to go to the army, and as a result, the parents have cast them aside.
That is incredibly important work. And if you'll allow me, Mike, I wanted to kind of turn it a little bit to Susan. Susan, if I am correct, you serve as a therapist, specifically helping with the mental health issues that Olim struggle with. Let's start with your work in general, and then we'll get, to the specific moment that we are in. What generally are you focused on in your practice?
I'm here in two capacities, but the main capacity that I'm here is that Mike and I work together on a voluntary basis for KeepOlim. I am the director of KeepOlim's mental health program. It's quite unique in the fact that all our therapists are Olim Chadashim themselves.
Wow.
We have therapists that give their time to us from all over the world. And between us, we speak a variety of languages. So we're able to work with Olim from a variety of countries. We fill a niche for low-cost therapy. Therapy can be extremely expensive and it can cause problems for Olim who are on low wages. We like to think that everybody comes to live in Israel with positive and good mental health. Unfortunately, we find that it's very much the opposite way around. People come to live in Israel and suddenly any issues that they had in their countries of origin, which they're hoping to wipe the slate clean because of making Aliyah and because of the difficulties of all the things that go alongside that, their mental health starts to break down. And that's where we fill that niche.
What are some of the general struggles that people have in making Aliyah? You move your home, and I guess you move into a new city. It's about getting acclimated. There's a new language and a new culture. What are the specific trends that you find which exacerbate that transition? I mean, transitions in general are hard, whether or not you're moving to a new country, but what do you find are the telltale signs and the most common symptoms that you find with people when they make Aliyah?
So I think you've already answered part of that question, and that is transition itself. Moving from a country where life is relatively easy and comfortable, coming to Israel where it's the most beautiful country in the world. We all want to be here, but people sometimes have difficulty with the bureaucracy, with moving into the wrong neighborhoods probably, so they're not feeling welcome in their communities, so they're becoming isolated and lonely. Some people find it hard to find employment, so that affects their income, which then affects their mental well-being. So look, there are plenty of people that come to Israel and have a very, very positive transition, but then we seem to pick up the people that sometimes really struggle with that transition because maybe they're making Aliyah on their own and maybe they have no family here. We fill that kind of gap, but then we have other kinds of issues as well, but we deal with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, all the common factors. And then we work with the gay community, we work with transgender community. We are an umbrella for all kinds of Olim. We don't pick and choose our Olim. We work with anybody that wants to come into our organization.
So tell me a little bit about the interventions that are needed for someone who is struggling with a transition. Is there a common form of therapy or common coping mechanisms that you offer to help people make that transition a little bit more digestible?
I suppose it depends where that client is when they get to us. That's a very important part. But generally, it's listening to them, it's supporting them, and being able through our organization to assist them with certain aspects. So if they've got a contract for a rental apartment, for argument's sake, then I can offer the services within our unit because we have a lawyer that checks those free of charge. So that can immediately take away a lot of stress from people. It's a big new world out there. The bureaucracy, we have people on our board that can help with bureaucratic issues, which we do on many occasions manage to help them with things like that. It's the fact that we are an organisation that in some way offers a complete package. So we're able to signpost into different areas of our organisation. For argument's sake, there is a section where we have a programme which helps Olim if they've got no money for Shabbat. So we have a Feed Olim programme, which actually is very relevant now because I'm now beginning to take calls in from clients who haven't been able to work for 10 days, okay, who have rent to pay. Only one member of their family is working, and suddenly they're finding that they are not got enough money for food to be able to pay their rent. So those are the kind of things that are impacting starting now. That's without the soldiers and their families.
Tell me a little bit about what's happening on the ground right now that you're seeing with New Olim, people who came to Israel right now. Is their experience different? Are you in touch specifically with lone soldiers during the war? What are you hearing from people within your orbit that is happening right now?
So with the lone soldiers that I'm working with, first of all, they're coming from around the world. Each demographic area has their difficulty, non-difficulty. A lot of kids right now, for example, who are coming from the United States, and I don't like sounding biased, but a lot of the kids that are coming from the United States come to Israel to join the army, thinking that the army is almost like a summer camp. And it is not. You have to understand that the Israeli army is one of the toughest armies of the world. So when they're thinking I'm going to be a paratrooper or I'm going to be in any one of the combat units, it's a piece of cake. And it's not, because they go through 8 months of very intense training. And some of them didn't realize that it would be so hard. And that's where they call me, Mike, help me. What do I do now? I don't want to do this anymore, or it's too difficult, or I'm arguing with my commanders. I'm not getting along with them. I need help. Or upon occasion, you have a lone soldier because their family is outside of the country where there's a medical crisis at home, where somebody passes away, somebody becomes ill, and we need to work out a way with the army to get them time to go and visit their family during their personal crisis and make sure they're okay.
Susan, can you share with me a little bit? Are you working directly with lone soldiers now? You know, someone who's going out to war, families who are, saying goodbye. They just came to Israel and they're watching a child go off during an active military period. What words can you even say? What can you even share to help provide some comfort or give some semblance of stability to soldiers and their families? And a lot of them aren't even able to kind of be present for therapy. So what exactly can the mental health service do right now? What are you kind of mobilizing in a situation where these soldiers are not present, they're not able, and they just made this choice. They're New Olim. Everything is really fully upside down. What exactly can you do to address the mental health of soldiers and their families?
So that's a very interesting question, because in our program, and the section of the KeepOlim program that we do is Tikva, which is our mental health program. We offer free therapy to lone soldiers before they draft, join their service, and for 1 year after they've left the army. They're in therapy with us. We have over 250 lone soldiers in therapy with us on a weekly basis in our organisation. At this moment in time, the only thing that I have personally been able to do, and my team have personally been able to do, is send messages to our lone soldiers to check that they are safe and ask them to check in with us. None of them at this moment in time, they've cancelled their sessions because they're on active duty, and it's just a matter of supporting them when they need us. Like last night, I got a text from one of my soldiers that I've been working with for about 8 months, who moved back to America and came back for Milwin, but wasn't expecting to come back for war. And he texted me last night and said, Susan, I really need some help. I really need some support, but I don't know when I'm free. So I said, I'm open 24/7. Just call me. I'm not going to say to somebody, you can only call me during these hours. That's not the case. How we're doing it now is we are starting a support line, which is going to be called Tikva Line, which is hoping to go live in the next couple of days. And that is a support line for Olim, hopefully in various languages, but predominantly at the moment to start with in English. One thing I must say to you is that there has been an outpouring of absolute chesed from therapists all over the world volunteering their time to us. I can't begin to tell you the number of therapists that say, we want to help, we want to support you. How can we do that? And because of their kindness, because of their chesed, we're able now to get this helpline off the ground. And that will be 24/7 for parents of lone soldiers, for lone soldiers, for anybody in Israel that is an Oleh can contact us, and they will have a friendly, safe space, a space where they're able to talk and express how they're feeling to somebody who's going to listen and validate their feelings. So it's not therapy, it's a support group. We are starting a support group this week for the parents of lone and Olim soldiers. That's going to be live on Thursday, and that will be a series of support groups that we've got going. So we are mobilizing different things within our organization to meet the needs of what is now, because the needs of what is now is not therapy. It's supporting people and validating people and being there for them. Our country is totally in shock. We're all numb. None of us can actually believe. You know, I live in Netanya, okay? Mike lives near Rehovot. His experience of the war is different to mine. He'll say to me, I've got to go. I'm in a siren. Bye. Where I am, I'm quite protected from that. But today, my kids rang me. They checked in on the family WhatsApp group. Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Why? Because all three of them experienced a siren at the same time. So I've got it from all angles at the moment. But yeah, so we are falling in with what we feel is necessary for the times that we're in at the moment, but preparing for the outfall of what this war is going to bring here in Israel. And it's going to bring a lot of trauma. Our soldiers, our Olim, our Israeli community are going to be facing a lot of trauma as a result of this war. And we are building for the future, and that's what our team is doing now.
Tell me a little bit about how you run a support group. How does that work? Is there an opening question? Just take me inside the experience of a support group for soldiers. What exactly happens? Who is in the room? I'm curious about even details like how you organize the chairs. It's in a circle, I assume, so people can share. But how do you run a support group, and what are people sharing in a support group?
So the support group we have done in the past, we used to do them live before COVID, and then we moved all our support groups online when we had COVID, and we were running something like 52 support groups during COVID. Our support group now is again going online because the support group for the parents of lone and Olim soldiers is going to be open up to parents in different countries because they're going to need to be able to connect to each other. So it will be over Zoom. The same if we do one for the lone soldiers, again, it will be over Zoom because they're all over the place. You know, I can't say to you, let's do one in Tel Aviv, because the soldiers are based all over the country. So they need to access something that's simple and easy. And Zoom is the best way for that for us. All the people to the support group will be invited to come to the support group to start with. Okay, so the invitations will go out. We will invite them via Zoom. There's a team of 3 therapists that are doing the introduction to the support group. Each one of those therapists is highly trained, and we will explain to the group the basis of what a support group is, which is a safe environment in which to be able to express yourself openly without being judged, without harassment, in a way that you feel that is good for you. Each person is given a specific time to be able to speak, let's say 5 minutes, in a space where nobody's allowed to interrupt. Okay, so that's free space, held and important. Each one will have a turn, and then at the end of that, we will come together as a group and see how that felt. And people then can express if they gained anything from that sharing, what their experience is. From this initial meeting, we will then offer support groups on a weekly basis, and those people then will group up with the therapists, and that will be their support group. So it's that kind of a space where they're held. And if, you know what, they want to sit there and cry, that's also valuable. If they want to sit there in silence, that's also valuable. It's just allowing people in an empathic way, in a non-judgmental way, to express what they need to express.
That is incredible work, and the work that you are doing on behalf of Knesset Yisrael and the Jewish people really is so vital and so important. What are you doing now to kind of take care of your own experience, your own emotional and mental health needs? You are running an organization that obviously has incredible needs. There's incredible stress and urgency right now. So what are you doing to take care of Mike?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you, Susan and I speak several times during the day, and we touch base with each other on how we're doing. You know, how did this morning go? How did this afternoon go? What did you hear? What did that make you feel? and how are you dealing with it?
Susan, I know Mike mentioned that you're checking with one another, but I was wondering if you could kind of weigh in, given your background in mental health as a mental health professional. If you're carrying the weight of all the people you're in touch with in the organization, what exactly are you doing to ensure that you have the capacity to rise to all of the needs and the urgency of this moment?
That's a very good question. Apart from speaking to Mike 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times a day, I have my own supervision. I have the most amazing supervisor who I check in with on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis. I can offload onto him exactly what I'm feeling. He's absolutely superb. And then I have a team of therapists. We're 49 therapists in a group. So I keep checking in with them. Are you all right? Just humor me and text me to say you're safe. And they will check in with me, and that gives me piss up as well. So yeah, talking, expressing, kind of helping others helps me actually. You know, for the last 4 days, excluding Shabbat, but for the last 4 days, I don't think I've left my office. I'm starting work at 6 a.m. and finishing perhaps at 1 a.m. in the morning.
We're speaking now, just so our listeners know, it's past 10 o'clock in Israel right now. And I offered you the 8 o'clock slot. You said, no, I'd rather speak at 10.
And I have some people to speak to after you and I have finished. Yeah, that actually is helping me cope. The fact that I'm working with a purpose to help other people, to help them get through this situation. And that gives me a lot of meaning in my life. So I am looking after my own mental well-being through others.
Susan and Mike, I can't thank you both for joining and all of your work on behalf of the Jewish people. Continued prayers, continued love, continued success in helping Amcha Yisrael, Be'eretz Yisrael. I cannot thank you enough for joining me today.
Thank you. Take care. Be safe.
Just remember, we're all in this together, and that's how it's going to be.
I reached out to another psychologist who is working with soldiers in Israel, directly with soldiers in Israel. Her name is Dr. Ayala Dayan, and the good friend who connected me is Rabbi David Gottlieb. I'm so grateful to him and his friendship over the years and sending our love and tefillos to him. Dr. Ayala Dayan works directly with soldiers, and she was kind enough, after speaking with her, to send me actual voice notes that she sends to soldiers, just the techniques and exercises to help keep them grounded in the field, to help them integrate and process the intensity and urgency of the experience that they are in. I was very moved by it, and I thought to have that experience, to hear what they're hearing, to hear that grounding exercise, who knows, maybe some of our listeners may need it themselves. Here are the messages that Dr. Ayala Dayan is sending to Israeli soldiers in the field in Israel.
So one of the most powerful techniques that can be used for reducing stress and anxiety in the moment is a technique called a grounding technique. And before we get into that, though, I'd like to go through how breathing exercises can help us to reduce our stress and tension. And they'll be the breathing exercises that you'll use as part of the grounding technique. So the first thing to know about breathing exercises is that we produce a compound called nitrous oxide in our nose when we breathe in. And that's the same compound that's used in the dentist's office to help us relax. So we always want to breathe in through our nose. We breathe in for 4 seconds, then we hold for 7, and we exhale through our mouths for 8 seconds. And the reason we do that is so that we don't blow back out the nitrous oxide that we just created. So the grounding technique works by, first you start by sitting in a comfortable position with your legs and your arms uncrossed. Then you breathe in deeply and slowly using the 4-7-8 technique, and you do 3 breaths in this way. Then you look around you and you start by naming 5 non-distressing objects that you can see. You see the floor, you see the sky, you see your shoes, you see the ground around you, whatever it is. Anything that you can see, you start by naming 5 specific things that are around you that you can see that don't cause distress. Then once you do that, you go back and you do 3 more breaths using the same 4 in, hold for 7, out for 8. And then you go on and you name 5 non-distressing sounds that you can hear around you. You hear people talking, you hear birds chirping, you hear people in the background making noise, getting their own shoes on, whatever it is. 5 things that don't cause you distress, okay? And then again, you go back to your breathing and you do it for 3 breaths. And then the final thing that you do is you look for 5 non-distressing things that you can feel. You can feel the breeze on your skin, you can feel the sun, you can feel yourself breathing, you can feel your shirt. Anything that you can feel, you find 5 things that don't cause you distress and you name them. And then you go on and you do 3 breathing activities, again, 3 breaths in and out, and you can do this grounding activity as often as needed. One of the most important aspects of dealing with stress and anxiety and trauma in a very, very stressful situation is to keep yourself focused on the present. And the grounding technique will help you stay focused on the present, especially when your thoughts or your feelings or physically you're feeling everything running out of your control. Maybe your thoughts are running out of your control. Maybe you're feeling very anxious and you're starting to breathe quickly, or you're feeling panicky and sweaty, or you're starting to have very catastrophic thinking. This is something that you can use right in the moment to help bring yourself back. The next step is to really focus on what are your immediate needs and concerns, and keep it focused on that. Really, what are you concerned about and what do you need? And what then can be done about those to create a practical plan to address those issues. Okay, that's very, very important for staying grounded in the moment. It's also important to recognize that we're not going to get through any of this without support. And so to figure out who your support network is, who you can turn to. There's people all around you. There's lots and lots of people. Everybody wants to help. Everyone's on your side. And whatever we can do, everyone will be doing what they can to help. All we need is for people to reach out and ask us and to tell us what we can do to help, and we will be there. And this goes not only for me, obviously, but for every single one of your friends and family and loved ones. There's always someone to turn to, whether it's a beloved teacher that you had in school, a friend, a colleague at work when you worked in some other job, somebody in your unit. Make sure that you have somebody that you feel that you can turn to. And it's also important to be able to be somebody that others can turn to and to model calm. And when you're in those moments of calm, to be able to reach out to someone you see struggling, and when somebody else is struggling, that they know that they can reach out, and that you can reach out as well when you're struggling. So that's one of the most important things that we can do to help ourselves and our units. And we also have to further recognize that there are people in our units that have gone through traumatic experiences, whether in their time in the Army or in their lives, and there can be triggers as we go through these experiences, whether they're sights or sounds or even smells can be triggers. And the more we're very aware of what is going on with ourselves and we start to realize that we're being triggered, the more important it is to use that grounding technique. There's also lots of information on progressive muscular relaxation that can be used, or guided visual imagery that can be used. There's lots of ways in which people can have relaxation texts that can be used in the field, not necessarily using technology or requiring technology. The other last thing that I would say, in addition to seeking friends and looking to support others and use your own support network and creating a specific plan to address your immediate concerns and needs and breaking those down into manageable steps, is to really take care of yourself, to know what your strengths are, to believe in yourself, to know that you're strong and that you can cope, and that it's hard for all of us, and we all have waves of up and down. That's very natural and normal, but that you can cope and you can succeed and you are strong, and to think about when you have felt like that in past experiences and to use those experiences and bring them now when you're feeling really challenged, whether it's by fear or anxiety. It's really important to know yourself and to give yourself credit and strength, and to ask those around you to continue to encourage you and to give you strength. But on the flip side, sometimes things get really difficult to the point where people, react very strongly and they feel like the only answer is to either hurt themselves or to hurt someone else. And, if you are feeling like this or one of your colleagues is feeling like this, then please reach out. There's always people to help, and it's never the answer to hurt yourself. And sometimes extreme feelings of guilt or shame, where people are struggling with what they feel like they should have done in a moment or didn't do, can really work their way into our minds. And it's really important that we understand that this is our mind playing with us and trying to find ways to hurt us, and that the reality is that we did the best that we could in the moment, and we have to give ourselves credit for that. and to not allow ourselves to sink into a lot of negative thoughts.
There are some people who have incredible capacity to organize, to build community. And one of those people, who is our next guest, is doing something really incredible in the land of Israel. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. His name is Rabbi Reuven Taragin. He is the Dean of Overseas Students at Yeshivat HaKotel, Rosh Beit Midrash at Camp Moshava, and Educational Director of Mizrahi. And I really know him because he is like the mayor of every rabbinic WhatsApp group that I am in. Anytime that there is a need, an issue, boom, there will be a WhatsApp group that is filled with leaders throughout the world within the Jewish community, hundreds of them, all mobilized through the work of Rabbi Reuven Taragin. Among his many responsibilities, and he is doing so much on the ground right now in Eretz Yisrael. One of the things that he's doing that I wanted to highlight, because I was really moved by it, and I wanted to invite him on to 1840 to really share the importance of this program, and it's called Worldwide Jewish Unity. It is about building a sense of unity and achdus among the Jewish people. You can, of course, find out more about this initiative, and there are coordinators really throughout the world, but the website is acheinu.world. Acheinu is spelled ACHEINU.world, WORLD, acheinu.world. And Rabbi Reuven Taragin was gracious enough to come on to 1840, talk a little bit about why this program right now was so important. I found it very practical, very moving, and in many ways it builds upon what we heard from Dr. Danny Brom about the importance of being with one another. You know, it's not so much about techniques or breathing methods or this, being with people, and that sense of unity is something that I find a great deal of comfort, just being with people and building bridges with people. And that's everything that this program is. Here is our conversation with Rabbi Reuven Taragin. You have started an initiative that I really think is a part of the collective mental health of the Jewish people right now. We're seeing an outpouring of focus, of mobilizing, of packing. We have soldiers, cousins, sisters, brothers, children on the front lines. And there is this outpouring of unity, and you are rolling out a program called Worldwide Acheinu. Tell me a little bit about what this is, and why was this the program that you felt we needed as the Jewish people in this very moment?
Rav David, great to be with you. And obviously we're all dealing with a lot right now. I personally am dealing with helping my Talmidim and their parents. I'm dealing with helping our Chayalim in many different ways. But we have to think beyond just dealing with the situation. We have to think about what the message is for us and how we need to come out of this stronger and better as a people. And I think beyond strengthening the soldiers and ourselves and all the critical emergency work we need to do, we need to think about how we come out of this a more unified people. And obviously there's a lot, as you mentioned, a lot of care being shown, a lot of local Achdut initiatives. I think we need to think about how we're one people across the world. And what that means is we're different. And obviously we live differently, and it's fine to disagree. And it's fine to say that this is the right way to live al pi Torah, this is the wrong way to live. We have to have this. We have to know the difference between right and wrong. But within a family, we're a family, brother and a sister. And that's what we need to emphasize right now.
I just want to say one thing of why I loved it so much and why I felt so strong that I wanted to have you on. Again, this is called the Acheinu Worldwide Jewish Unity Initiative. And I loved it because it wasn't about just talking about unity or just, I don't know, wear a button. Your first thing that you say, the first thing is really remarkable. I want to read directly from what the campaign wrote because I really did find it moving. This is a time to resolve whatever issues you have with other people, families, neighbors, associates, past friends. Appreciate the importance of our people's unity and be the one to reach out to bury the hatchet. Meaning, you didn't just say, let's take a moment to look at a nice video of soldiers singing, take a moment to think about, the expansiveness of the Jewish people. Reach out to someone in your life, somebody who you know you had issues with, tension with, and bury the hatchet, connect with somebody. Was that deliberate, that's the first step you wanted in this campaign?
David, I think you said it perfectly. When people think about Achdus, they think about some kind of broad, nice, warm, conceptual idea of Jews in general. Achdus begins on the one-on-one. And I think this has to be done on three levels: the personal level, the communal level, and the international level. On the personal level, as you said, we have to resolve disputes. We have to think about people we have relationships with who we need to have stronger ones with. And we have to think about the people who live next door, across the street, down the block, who we interact with at work, on social media, who are Jewish, and we should have a relationship with, but we don't. That's, I think, the first step. Just to continue from there, communally, when we're getting together to pray, not any official program of the Jewish community, just to pray together, to think about how we can do that, to learn together. Not a rabbi statements, no statements, just personal Reb Yisrael. And obviously each community has to think about how to do this. One of the first people I spoke to was Herschel Schechter, who sent a beautiful video encouraging people to take part. I said, Reb Schechter, I want the shilas of each community to come to you to tell us how far we can go and how to do it. But right now we have to figure out how far can we go in bringing people together. And the one thing I'll add is what this program offers is, I'm not aware of anyone else offering, the international unity. We're working right now with 50, 60 countries. There should be an emblem that expresses this, that's across the world. And that can bring Jewish people together. I spoke to one of the chief rabbis of one of the countries, and he said, there's so many Achdus movements right now. I said to him, if you can tell me a movement right now to bring together world Jewry in a way that they identify with each other, I'll go back to my day job and throw my support behind it. He hasn't told me anything yet. And again, it's not for Orthodox Jews, but Orthodox Jews. It's for anyone who's a Jew. We're not talking about you're right, you're wrong, legitimatizing, not legitimatizing. That's a different conversation. We're talking about coming together as a family. And I believe that's what Hashem is calling us upon us to do right now.
I find the work that you do incredibly moving, particularly in this moment. You have an incredible knack and ability to get people mobilized online. I think it's because you're situated in the heart of the world in Yeshivat HaKotel, in Jerusalem, in the Old City, and able to kind of serve as the pumping heart to get all of the veins and all of the circulatory system of the Jewish people passionate, involved in a project of bringing people together. And it starts, as you mentioned, on the individual level. And really on a personal level, if I could say, even being here with you, it feels like the beginning of that. It feels like the beginning of connection, of bringing people together. And I'm so grateful for you, not only for the work that you've done up until this point, but in this moment, galvanizing Amcha Yisrael to come together. Thank you so much for all of your efforts, your message, and our continued tefillos are with you, your family, the community, and of course, Amcha Yisrael.
Rav David, thank you very much for the kind words. We're all doing our best at this moment, and shkoach for your work, and let's hopefully together, Am Yisrael, come out of this, like I said in the beginning, stronger than we went in. And in which way, from the difficulty will come something sweeter, and we'll hear what Hashem wants from us, and hopefully come closer to the Mashiach, because we're a people who deserves it.
Amen. Finally, I wanted to share a student-led initiative that I got wind of that I found very moving. It's a demographic that is often overlooked. It's hard to focus on anything but people who are on the literal front lines of war, the soldiers who are really risking everything. And it's such an important focus, but very often there are kind of like other demographics around who are really doing incredible work. And, you know, one of the things that I was wondering about is that there is I don't want to call it a custom, it's basically become a custom right now, to spend a gap year in Israel after high school. It's become pretty well accepted, certainly in the modern Orthodox community, in the yeshiva community. Sometimes they do this after, 2 years of learning in base medrash. After high school, they'll do it in their third year or their fourth year. In American Orthodox high schools and modern Orthodox high schools really around the world, in England, Australia, they spend a year in Israel in a yeshiva or seminary. Men and women after 12th grade, they spend a year studying Torah. These are people who don't necessarily plan on living in Israel, but they have decided to spend their year in Israel. And this year, they've just begun this year, the end of August, usually the beginning of the Hebrew month of Elul. And now they're getting their year started. They got interrupted with all of the Yom Tovim and the holidays. And now they have this year with this cloud of war hovering overhead. And I know for many people, the first instinct is, this is not going to be our year. Let's go home. Let's try it next year. And honestly, my point is not, God forbid, to criticize anybody who is making that calculation for themselves or for their families, not to criticize any families or parents who that is their first instinct. But I do want to highlight, this is student-led, that there's a group of students in Israel who are making a push to remind one another that we are not going anywhere. We should stay for the duration of our year in Israel, even under the circumstances, even with all of the vulnerability and risk. We committed to spend a year studying Torah in yeshiva and seminaries. This is our year, and we are not going anywhere. And I was very moved by this. And it really comes back to that foundational principle from Dr. Brom of being with one another. Let's stay here together. Let's find a way to build that resilience, not to flee from this moment, but to embrace, to look squarely at this moment and find a way to build life even amid this difficulty. It is my great privilege to introduce 3 students, a quick conversation about students who have taken on the initiative. We're not going home. We're not going anywhere. We are staying here in Israel. One demographic that is really incredible right now are the students, American students, who traditionally spend the year in Israel in seminaries and yeshivas, coming from across the United States, Canada, really across the world, to spend a year of study, often after their 12th grade, a gap year. And there's definitely a lot of anxiety for students of like, maybe we should go home. Maybe it's too dangerous. It's too risky. We should all get on airplanes and go home. And there is a student-run initiative of students who are spending their year in Israel right now who say, #, we are not going anywhere. We are here. We are not leaving Israel, even in a time of danger, even in a time of chaos. We are here to stay. I want to first hear from a student, David Weintraub, a little bit about why this is so important. David, tell me a little bit about this initiative.
Well, many Talmidim and Talmidot have left Israel. Many people abroad are afraid. Those who are here know there's nothing to be afraid of, but fear is contagious. This is a time for us to stand up and say that we are not going anywhere. We are standing firm with our people at their time of need. We will not give in to Hamas a moral victory. We are confident and proud to be able to be here now. We are strengthening ourselves and supporting our people every way we can. First and foremost, by being here with them at their time of need. We are staying here, staying strong, staying with our people, staying in Israel. We will grow through this experience. We'll be able to tell our children and grandchildren that we stood firm when we needed to and inspire them if they ever need to. Let's stand united and announce proudly to the world in any way we can, WhatsApp, social media, etc., that we are not going anywhere. May Hashem reward our staying power, faith, and support of our people by blessing us and our people with peace and strong. Hashem od lamoyitem, Hashem yavarech etamo v'shalom.
Not going anywhere. Joby, tell me a little bit, why are you choosing to stay in Israel right now?
I think from the moment that we all heard the sirens and we found out the news, initially it was very scary, but once we finally moved a little farther, we realized that in Israel, it's really the best place to be. We have our learning set up where we can learn Torah for everyone. The chesed opportunities in Israel, as opposed to other places, are far greater because this is actually where everything is going on. And I think that's why it'd be better to stay here as opposed to going home to where we don't have our yeshivas in place. We don't have these organizations running for our chayalim who are a couple hours drive away. So I really think this is an incredible opportunity for us to stay here and not go home.
Really, really incredible, remarkable, and it's so inspiring for someone to see a moment of crisis. There's always a feeling to turn the other way and run. There's fight or flight, and you've decided to stay. There are a lot of places that you can learn, but there's a special quality of the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. I want to allow one other student to speak. Eitan Laub, can you share with me briefly what is animating your conviction to stay in Eretz Yisrael? You came for a year to study in the yeshiva. You could always defer and come back next year. Why are you staying in Israel for your gap year right now?
So I think similar to what Joby was saying, that meaning we have the structure here. The yeshiva is here, right? I chose to come to Israel for the year to learn here in Israel. I didn't choose to come here so I could leave and then go learn somewhere else in America. I think it's the most productive for me to be doing that and learning here. And I think also that Baruch Shem B'lei Hara, most of the yeshivas are in very safe places and very safe environments. So okay, we might have a siren, we might need to go down every couple of days. Point is, but thank God we're doing pretty well. I'd honestly rather be here with the rest of Klal Yisrael, being actually able to experience what it's like when Klal Yisrael comes together, be with everyone, be able to support people who are on the front lines actively. I'm right there to support them, as opposed to from afar, like, I'm with you, I support you. But the Tehillim here for the Chayalim is very different from the Tehillim 6,000 miles away.
There's something really remarkable, and I'm so inspired by each of you, David, Joby, and Eitan, really speaking out. And I think this initiative is very important. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety, and rightfully so. You really made a choice to get behind the campaign to remind Americans, international students who are spending a gap year in Israel, now is the time to stay. Now is the time when we choose Eretz Yisrael. It's not because it's easy, it's not because it's the most serene, but because it is the land of the Jewish people. It is the land of Amcha Yisrael, Be'eretz Yisrael, and I thank you both, all of you, Eitan, Joby, and David, for your conviction to the land of Israel, to the Jewish people, and getting behind this project. Thank you so much, each of you, for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I wanted to leave our listeners with a brief conversation that I had with just an incredible person, somebody who I wish we had a longer time to speak with under different circumstances, because really right away, even texting him back and forth, sometimes you can tell that this is going to be a joyous conversation. One of the telltale signs always is when somebody asks me when I reach out for an interview and they say, oh, is it going to be on video? Everybody asks, is it going to be on video? And I say, no, we just need the audio. And the way people respond to that, it always tells you a little bit about them. His response, of course, was, yay, I can do this in my pajamas, which just like for a Harvard-educated psychiatrist is not what I was expecting. But Dr. Jacob Freedman is not anything that you would ever expect, and really such an incredible person. He is a psychiatrist in private practice in Jerusalem, and he did his residency training for psychiatry at Harvard's Longwood Psychiatric Residency. He's a longtime columnist like myself in Mishpacha magazine, where he wrote a very popular column called Off the Couch. Really an incredible person, a joyous person, and a person who I found really uplifting. Here is our conversation with Dr. Jacob Freedman. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what you are seeing on the ground now as a mental health professional. How should people be gauging their own mental health inside of a crisis like this?
We're all a bit, frankly, discombobulated to some degree based on the chaos that we have been experiencing here on the ground. If you live anywhere in this country, you have heard sirens, heard the explosions of rockets falling, of the Iron Dome. It is a very, very frightening experience to be here. If you are experiencing fear, if you are experiencing sorrow over the lives lost and the tragedy, if you are experiencing a deep rage and anger, these are all normal emotions. And if you're experiencing none of them, that's probably because you're shutting down, dissociating, and having another sort of severe traumatic response to the stress and de-stress of the situation. So when you ask what's happening here, the answer is we are all hurting so hard as a nation here in Eretz Yisrael, in many ways the same way that all Jews across the world are hurting. And I say that it's really, this is the biggest tragedy that has befallen Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, certainly in my short life. I can think of nothing that's comparable to the sadness, to the fear, to the rage that we all have right now. In the same sense, though, I have to be very honest that I couldn't be more grateful to be in Eretz Yisrael, because for all of the Jews who are overseas, the news that they see is traumatic. There's no other word for it. The information that is sent out to the world is so horrific. There's no other words. There's no words, period, to describe it. But when you're here in Eretz Yisrael, the brotherhood, the unity, the avat chinam, the selfless love that we feel for each other on the streets, people who look totally different, people who never talk to each other in their lives are running, giving hugs, not just the stories of ordering pizza and of offering to bring clothes, or of all the young people in the community who are opening up summer camps for people whose fathers have gone off to war, or all of the young boys and girls that are playing guitar in the streets and setting up flash dances of Am Yisrael Chai. The amount of positivity and the brotherhood and unity here, which is not shared in the news and which is not seen by people who are not living here, mamish, with their feet on the ground in Eretz Yisrael, I am grateful for that. I could not be more grateful for that. I could not imagine how scary it would be to be outside of Eretz Yisrael. So I really want to share that perspective with you. And again, when you read the news about all of the terrible things that have happened, it is traumatic. And when you start to dig deeper and go down the rabbit hole of all the terrible things that Qatar and Iran and Syria are doing, and all of the other nations that are wavering in their support of our brave country, it gets more and more scary, more and more confusing. And when you're here on the ground and you see guys with big kippahs, guys with little kippahs, guys with no kippahs, guys with baseball hats, guys with cowboy hats, running around hugging each other like they were best friends getting together for their 30th high school reunion, and they don't even know each other. You are filled with such inspiration, and it's the kind of positive emotions, positive feelings, the optimism, the trach gut v'sein gut, which in Yiddish means think positively and it'll end up positively. The Martin Seligman Positive Psychology 101, when you see it, when you live it here, that's really what's happening on the streets right now, more than anything else. In the face of all these rockets, we are a resilient people fundamentally. And yes, this is a once in a lifetime tragedy, but we are not victims. The Jewish people have never been victims. We are survivors. And frankly, when people ask me, what are some of the things that I can do to process what's happened, whether they were on the front lines, whether they were at the rave where so many people were cut down, or whether they're just at home abroad watching the news and experiencing the trauma secondhand. Cognitive restructuring, the power of positive thinking, specifically viewing oneself as a survivor, as a person who will grow from these experiences, as opposed to somebody who's been horribly victimized, that perspective allows personal growth in a way that I have no words to possibly describe. Other than that, I'm grateful to witness it and to be a part of it. And if I wasn't inspired on a moment-to-moment basis by everything that I see on the streets, I couldn't even believe it.
Are there any specific Jewish texts that you have found comfort in over this period, or even non-Jewish texts, like a book that you could recommend to our audience?
Tuesdays with Morrie. Everybody should read Tuesdays with Morrie. They should know it by path.
You should know it by heart.
You should know it by heart. Tuesdays with Morrie is an incredible book. As far as Jewish books out there, specifically during these stressful times, my dear buddy, Rabbi Dr. Benji Epstein, wrote a fantastic book about Jewish meditation. Dr. Feiner's book on Jewish mindfulness and meditation is also a very good one.
Yoni Feiner and Benji Epstein are both dear friends, and I hope your writing, which can be found on the Mishpacha website still. Have you published a book?
Yeah, I have a book of the stories and my own story of making Aliyah called Off the Couch, which is out there. I wrote a book at the recommendation of Rabbi Torsky Zatzal, Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Torsky, about mental health for kids. And I have a new book coming out in about a month or so on my experience again as a psychiatrist and many of the loving discussions I've had with my patients.
Dr. Jacob Freedman, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us today, sending all of our love and continued tefillos to you, your entire family, and the collective Amcha Yisrael, the Jewish people. And I hope next time that we speak, it's accompanied with a hug in person and connecting and showing that appreciation. There is a famous dialogue that was said in a film by a character named Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade. You can look that up if you don't know what I'm referring to. It's fairly famous, but there's one line in there that I've been thinking about a lot, where this colonel, who clearly has experience in, this character, it's played by Al Pacino, has experienced a great deal of trauma. He's blind from war and has clearly, seen a lot. As he says, there was a time these eyes could see. And he gets up to defend his caretaker named Charlie. And there's one line in this very famous cinematic speech where he says, "There's nothing like the sign of an amputated spirit. There is no prosthetic for that. There is no prosthetic for an amputated spirit." And that's a line that I've been thinking about a lot, because I am looking around, and as much as we are not all right, as much as we are not okay, as much as we are far from okay, I have seen, and we have all seen, a great deal of resolve, of determination, of really seeing the embodiment before our eyes of Netzach Yisrael Lo Yishaker. The eternity of the Jewish people is on full display in this very moment. And for all of the trauma and for all of the difficulty that people are experiencing, and in different ways throughout the world, I think everyone can say that, have the dignity of language to be able to say, I am struggling with this. I don't feel comfortable saying it because maybe I'm not a soldier, maybe I'm not having the same risk, but giving someone the dignity of language to be able to say, I'm not okay. But even with all of that, I think collectively what I find so moving is that, as difficult as it is, we are not an amputated spirit. As much suffering and as much pain as we have, our resolve, our focus, our spirit, and our passion is intact. And seeing that and witnessing that in this generation for all of the pain that we've experienced is something that I find incredibly uplifting. But as I remind all of my students, I really do hope people are taking care of themselves, giving themselves time to breathe or to veg out. I'm not going to give you suggestions now on how to do that or how I've been doing that, but giving yourself a moment to take deep breaths, to feel that sense of place, to feel that sense that we are anchored in something beyond ourselves, that we're not living constantly in survival mode, but having a moment to really see and embrace appreciation, to feel that collective hug of the Jewish people, of Amcha Yisrael, wherever you may be. I hope that we're all giving ourselves that opportunity, or whatever coping mechanisms each of us may need. I hope that we are affording ourselves those opportunities. And there's really has not been a time in my lifetime where that sense of pride, that sense of passion of being a part of Amcha Yisrael, of this collective unfolding story of the Jewish people, any more than right now. So thank you all so much for listening. Again, this is a very special episode of 1840. We have a few more plans, some really interesting angles, highlights, lenses to discuss everything that is transpiring and unfolding in Israel as we speak. If you want to learn more about 1840, you can, of course, visit 1840.org. That's 18forty.org. And I also want to remind all of our listeners about the new weekly initiative, the partnership that we have with the All Parsha app run by the OU. Download the app. There are some great resources for studying Chumash. I have a weekly series called Reading Jewish History in the Parsha. You can also subscribe. I have a weekly write-up of that audio. Each of them are a little bit different. There's always some bonus material and a lot of extra links in the Substack. The Substack is Reading Jewish History in the Parsha.substack.com. You can check that out. Link to our emails. Sign up for our emails on 1840.org. Thank you all so much for listening, and stay curious and stay safe, my friends.
Shomer Yisrael, Shemor She'eris Yisrael, V'ayovad Yisrael, Omrim Shema Yisrael, Shomer Yisrael, Shemor She'eris Yisrael, V'ayovad Yisrael, Omrim Shema Yisrael, Shomer Yisrael, Shemor She'eris Shalom.